Hello friends, and welcome back to Medieval Screen Finds. Tonight, we're not here for the glorious charge, the valiant knights, or frankly, anyone who got to have a good time. No, tonight we're dragging you, probably kicking and screaming, into the wonderfully grim reality of the medieval castle guard. Forget your romanticized notions of chivalry and dramatic sieges. We're here to talk about the poor sods whose primary job description could, at any given moment, involve getting an arrow through the eye. Cozy, right? You've seen the Hollywood epics, all the sweeping shots of fortresses under siege. Now, let's peel back those rose-tinted layers of cinematic nonsense and get to the sweaty, bored, and perpetually paranoid truth. We're not here for the guy leading the cavalry. We're here for the guy who had to stand there all night, every night, praying nothing happened. Because nothing happening meant he still had a job and wasn't impaled on a pike. We call them the quiet defenders, which, if we're being honest, sounds a lot like chronically underappreciated human speed bumps. Their lives were a masterclass in vigilance, routine, and a profound sense of duty that was, let's be real, probably hammered into them with a stick. These weren't your heroes. These were the silent, often invisible, and perpetually freezing sentinels. The castle's eyes and ears, and occasionally its very pungent nose. So tonight, we're strapping you into the full medieval guard experience. No high drama, just the gnawing boredom, the constant low-level terror, the subtle rhythms of inevitable misery, and the surprisingly twisted skills these poor bastards employed to survive, or at least to delay their demise. Get ready to feel the cold stone, smell the eau de medieval humanity, and discover why quiet was often a very, very bad sign. This isn't a story to soothe you to sleep. It's a story to make you deeply appreciate indoor plumbing and the invention of the duvet. You're welcome. If you're ready to trade your comfy couch for a drafty tower, hit that like button right now. And if you're brave enough to face the medieval night with us, consider subscribing and ringing that bell so you don't miss our next descent into historical absurdity. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. We love seeing who's joining us on this delightful journey into medieval misery. Alright, let's kick things off by forcing you, quite unceremoniously, into the charming, utterly unenviable shoes of a medieval castle guard. Welcome to your new stone prison after dark. This isn't some quaint historical reenactment where you get to wear a clean tunic and pose for tourists. Oh no. This is your new clammy reality, a constant state of low-level dread punctuated by profound, soul-crushing boredom. You are now a living, breathing, and likely shivering extension of the castle's defenses, a human alarm system with significantly more chattering teeth and existential angst. Prepare yourself, because the only thing more pervasive than the damp is the quiet, insistent hum of your own paranoia. Picture it. The medieval day has finally ground to a halt. The blacksmith, a man whose entire existence seems to be defined by the rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil, has finally ceased his delightful cacophony. That persistent, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the miller's wheel, which has been the background track to your waking hours, has faded into a distant memory, much like your hope for a truly restful night. The peasants, bless their perpetually toiling, slightly unwashed hearts, have stopped, well, peasanting. Their boisterous, slightly unhygienic chatter has receded, replaced by the eerie, almost total silence of a world without electricity, without cars, without the comforting, predictable hum of modern life. This is a silence so profound, it actively screams at you. A vacuum where your modern brain expects noise, leaving you acutely aware of every single unsettling sound, every creak, every distant hoot, every drip of water in the dungeon below takes on a new, unsettling resonance, each a tiny hammer blow against your sanity. The last embers in the hearth within the castle walls flicker, casting long, unsettling shadows that dance just at the edge of your peripheral vision. These aren't cute, playful shadows that you might find in a children's book. Oh no. These are the kind that morph into shapes that are definitely not just shadows, making your already overworked mind leap to the most unhelpful, most terrifying conclusions. Is that a discarded cloak slumped against the wall, or is it an assassin slowly detaching himself from the masonry, preparing to introduce you to his very sharp friend? Probably a cloak. Probably. But the doubt, that delicious, gnawing doubt, is your constant companion, an insidious little voice whispering, "What if?" Every groan of the ancient wood, every whisper of the wind through the crumbling stone becomes a potential harbinger of doom. Your imagination, deprived of external stimulation, becomes a hyperactive generator of worst-case scenarios, a truly dreadful superpower. And you? You're standing there, or perhaps pacing, if your watch commander is feeling particularly lenient and trusts you not to fall off the battlement in a fit of boredom-induced narcolepsy. The castle isn't just settling around you, it's groaning like an arthritic old man who just remembered he has to pay taxes, and also that he has a chronic case of the plague. You hear the timber creak, a sound that could be the wind whistling through a poorly sealed arrow slit, or, a dozen heavily armed men quietly scaling the wall with grappling hooks made from suspiciously quiet rope and a profound disdain for your continued existence. That distant rustle of leaves beyond the moat. Probably just the wind, or a small, very quiet raiding party, heavily camouflaged, with excellent leaf-rustling techniques and an even better sense of stealth. And that subtle shift of unseen animals within the castle grounds, the soft scuttling in the walls, the faint squeak from the storeroom. Almost certainly just rats. Big ones. The kind that look at you with judgment, probably assessing your cleanliness and wondering if you'll drop any crumbs from your meager bread ration. They're so comfortable, so utterly unbothered by your presence, they probably pay rent in disease vectors and occasional nightmares. This isn't soothing silence. This is the kind of quiet that makes you acutely aware of how alone you are, how vulnerable your fleshy bits are, and how many sharp, pointy objects might be heading your way at any given second. It's the quiet before the storm, the quiet before the chaos, the quiet that makes you profoundly grateful for the invention of noise-cancelling headphones that won't be invented for another 700 years. Your job isn't to look imposing, mind you. You're not here for the hero shots, the dramatic poses, or the inspiring speeches that might one day grace a very dusty history scroll. You are not a knight. You are not a noble. You are, fundamentally, a human bollard. Your primary directive is to just be there, like a particularly stubborn, slightly damp gargoyle that occasionally breathes, shivers, and has a desperate need for a privy break. You're the castle's living, breathing, and likely shivering extension of its defenses. You are, in essence, a human alarm system, but with significantly more chattering teeth, existential dread, and a profound lack of an off switch or a convenient mute button. Absolutely vital for security, yet utterly ignorable in the grand scheme of things. Most people within the castle probably assume you're just part of the permanent fixtures, blending so seamlessly into the ancient masonry that they'd be genuinely surprised if you moved, let alone spoke. Congratulations, you've achieved peak historical anonymity. Your uniform isn't a symbol of power. It's a camouflage for your misery, a drab, uninspired testament to your profound unimportance in the grand narratives, yet your absolute criticality to the mundane reality. Your success isn't measured in enemy bodies piled high, though that would be a bonus, and certainly a welcome break from the routine, but in the sheer, unadulterated boredom you inflict upon potential threats. No one wants to attack that castle. they'd say, shaking their heads in weary resignation. There's always some miserable sod just standing there, silently judging your life choices and radiating an aura of profound tedium that could curdle milk. Your stillness, your unchanging presence, was a weapon, a psychological deterrent that screamed, "We're watching, we're always watching, even when we're falling asleep on our feet, we're still technically watching. Go bother someone else, preferably someone with less unwavering, depressing vigilance." Your silence was a weapon, a psychological deterrent that was often more effective than 1,000 armed men, simply because it suggested an endless, unwavering vigilance that no sane person, or even a slightly unhinged bandit, would want to test. It was the medieval equivalent of a very uncomfortable, very public surveillance camera. Except the camera was a human being who desperately needed a nap and probably a good bath. Forget the glorious clashes. Forget the heroic last stands that get etched into history books and later adapted into historically inaccurate blockbuster films. Your real defense isn't a gleaming sword or a perfectly aimed crossbow bolt that miraculously finds its target in the dark. It's the profound, existential dread you project. Your mere, unchanging presence, standing there like a statue that occasionally breathes, was often enough to make any would-be attacker think, "You know what? I'm good. I'll just raid that other, less perpetually guarded village down the road. They probably have more sheep anyway, and significantly less of that soul-crushing human stillness that makes me question my life choices and consider a career in monasticism." Your silence was a weapon, a psychological deterrent that was often more effective than 1,000 armed men, simply because it suggested an endless, unwavering vigilance that no sane person, or even a slightly unhinged bandit, would want to test. It was the medieval equivalent of a very uncomfortable, very public surveillance camera, except the camera was a human being who desperately needed a nap and probably a good bath. Oh, the responsibility. It's not just about the physical walls, it's about everything and everyone inside them. Every duke, duchess, squalling child, and flea-bitten servant within those stone confines. They're your problem. And all those valuable tapestries, the Lord's surprisingly large collection of pointy hats. Seriously, what was with those? The barrel of questionable ale, the single chipped chamber pot, and the Lord's prize-winning pig. Also your problem. Every single valuable, vulnerable, or vaguely edible thing within these walls rests, quite literally, on your ability to remain awake and observant, preferably without spontaneously combusting from sheer exhaustion. This isn't a burden that causes anxiety per se. It's a deep-seated, internalized sense of duty that mostly manifests as a dull ache in your lower back, combined with the crushing weight of knowing that one slip-up could mean a very unpleasant end for everyone you've ever vaguely tolerated, including yourself. It's about the profound internal commitment to not getting yourself or anyone else within shouting distance brutally murdered. A true testament to the medieval concept of job security, where the security referred almost exclusively to the job itself and rarely, if ever, to the person doing it. Your continued employment was directly tied to the absence of catastrophe, a rather precarious metric for success in any era. You are the quiet guardian of routines. The castle's heartbeat, its daily rhythm, depends on your unwavering presence. The merchants arriving safely at dawn, their meager goods intact, the peasants tending their fields without fear of sudden raids, their lives proceeding in predictable misery, the Lord enjoying his questionable feast without an arrow through the window. All of it hinges on your vigilance. You are the invisible force that allows the mundane, yet vital functions of medieval life to proceed, a perpetual background hum of security that no one consciously acknowledges until it's tragically absent. This isn't a burden that makes you feel heroic. It makes you feel perpetually tired and vaguely resentful that everyone else gets to sleep soundly while you're out here communing with the rats and the unpleasantly chilly night air. The weight of this responsibility isn't spoken aloud. There are no pep talks from the Lord, no motivational posters in the guardhouse. It's an unspoken understanding, a grim acceptance of your role. You are a cog in a very large, very cold machine, and if you fail, the machine grinds to a halt, usually with a lot of screaming, fire, and the distinct smell of burning thatch. This quiet, internalized burden is what truly defines you, more than any weapon or uniform. It's the constant low hum of "don't screw this up" that plays on an endless loop in the back of your mind. A medieval soundtrack to your misery, occasionally punctuated by the distant, disquieting howl of a wolf. Whether you're freezing your bits off on a tower exposed to the full, unbridled fury of a medieval winter gale, your cloak flapping like a distressed raven, or staring at a particularly interesting patch of moss in a secluded, damp courtyard, your eyes straining in the gloom, you get a unique perspective. You see the world differently, stripped bare of its daytime distractions and social niceties. You witness the slow, agonizing creep of dawn that promises relief, but delivers only more monotonous duty. The first, almost imperceptible hint of grey light touching the eastern battlements, a sign that you haven't frozen to death yet. The gradual return of colour to the landscape. The world slowly reanimating from its nocturnal slumber, like a particularly sluggish zombie. You see the distant lights of a village that's probably getting robbed right now, but is far enough away for you to just shrug internally, because that's not your problem, not tonight anyway. And honestly, you've got your own existential crises to deal with. You observe the changing patterns of clouds that promise either rain, more rain, or slightly colder rain, each a subtle shift in the relentless, indifferent march of nature, each promising a new form of damp discomfort. Your quiet observation fosters a deep, intimate familiarity with how truly monotonous existence can be, a kind of Zen-like acceptance of slow, incremental suffering that would drive a modern individual to immediate, involuntary spasms. It's a level of boredom that modern humans, with their TikTok feeds, constant stimulation, and attention spans shorter than a medieval lord's temper, simply cannot comprehend without incurring serious psychological damage. You become an expert in the subtle shifts of the wind, the migration patterns of local bird life, the way the moonlight reflects off a distant puddle, seemingly insignificant details that become the entire landscape of your awareness, filling the vast, cold void left by human interaction and exciting events. You find yourself analysing the structural integrity of a distant fence post, or debating internally whether that particular star is actually getting brighter, or if you're just slowly losing your mind. The sensory details of your new life are pronounced. You will quickly learn to distinguish the myriad, often overwhelming smells of a medieval castle, the pervasive scent of damp stone that seems to cling to everything, an underlying aroma of unwashed humanity that is simply inescapable, the faint, comforting whiff of wood smoke that occasionally cuts through the prevailing stench of unmitigated squalor, and the ever-present cloying sweetness of uncollected human and animal waste. Your nose, once merely an instrument for breathing, becomes a highly calibrated detection device capable of differentiating between a casual domestic animal scent and the alarming, acrid smell of burning thatch from an invading force's torch. Is that the usual aroma of stale urine from the nearby gutter, or the distinct, alarming scent of something burning where it shouldn't be? This isn't just about observation. It's about ingesting your environment through every available orifice, building a complete, if frequently disgusting, picture of your surroundings. The psychological trauma of daily smells probably accumulated faster than the physical wear and tear on your feet. The sounds too become your constant companions, each taking on a new, heightened significance in the pervasive silence. The incessant scuttling of vermin in the walls, a symphony of tiny claws and desperate squeaks. The distant hoot of an owl that sounds suspiciously like a coded signal from an unseen scout. The creak of floorboards above that could be the Lord's mistress sneaking out for a dalliance or, a heavily armored raiding party making surprisingly quiet progress through the sleeping castle. Every drip of water in the dungeon below takes on a new, unsettling resonance, each drop a tiny hammer blow against your sanity, counting down to something. You learn to filter out the benign background noise and home in on the malevolent with an almost supernatural precision. Your ears, formerly for listening to charming minstrels, if you were lucky enough to have one, are now finely tuned instruments of paranoia capable of discerning the slightest anomaly in the nocturnal soundscape. And the cold. Oh, the glorious, all-encompassing cold. It seeps into your bones, a constant, dull ache that settles in your joints and probably hastens the onset of medieval arthritis, ensuring a painful retirement if you ever get one. Your thick wool cloak, which was supposed to offer some semblance of warmth, mostly just smells of wet sheep, provides a delightful breeding ground for fleas and lice, and seems to actively repel any warmth that might attempt to cling to you. You become intimately familiar with the concept of chilled to the marrow, because that marrow is now actively vibrating with cold, a constant low-frequency hum of hypothermia. The warmth of a brazier, if one is even provided, feels like a fleeting, luxurious dream, a temporary reprieve before the inevitable, creeping return of the bone-deep chill. You learn to shiver with a quiet dignity, conserving energy for when you actually need to sprint away from whatever unholy horror emerges from the shadows. You learn to appreciate the subtle warmth of your own breath, condensing in the frigid air, a small, pathetic comfort in a world determined to freeze you solid, and perhaps offer you a delightful case of frostbite to remember it by. So, welcome to the quiet, watchful world. Imagine yourself up there, feeling the cool, clammy stone, listening to the subtle sounds that are probably nothing or everything. Discover the hidden depths of a life dedicated to silent, unwavering, and utterly soul-crushing protection. Consider this your historical deep dive, not into peaceful rest, but into the profound gratitude you'll feel for not living in the 13th century. You're welcome. This isn't just a story, it's an experience designed to make you deeply, viscerally appreciate the modern conveniences you take for granted. A warm bed, a quiet night, and the absolute luxury of not having to worry about a rat judging your life choices from the shadows, or an assassin silently testing the strength of your bladder. You're not just listening, you're there, and it's probably colder than you think, and smellier, much, much smellier. All right, you've clocked your first glorious shift. You're cold, you're damp, and you're pretty sure that patch of moss just moved. You've had your initial dose of medieval quietude, and now, the real fun begins. The rigorous, often soul-crushing process of transforming you from a reasonably functional human being, or at least what passed for normal in the medieval era, into a perpetually alert, marginally effective human sensor array. This isn't just about handing you a pointy stick and a wool cloak that smells faintly of wet sheep. Oh no. This is about forging you, body and mind, into a discrete, unwavering piece of castle infrastructure, capable of enduring endless boredom and occasional, terrifying bursts of violence. Prepare yourself, because the path of the medieval guard is less a journey and more a very long, very damp, forced march towards quiet competence. Let's be brutally honest from the outset. If you signed up for this gig dreaming of glory, valiant charges, or even a decent chance at a heroic death that would warrant a ballad, you picked the wrong bloody career. You're not here to be a knight. Knights, bless their dramatically dying hearts, are trained to swing ridiculously heavy swords, practice their noble poses, and expire gloriously in a ditch, preferably with a bard nearby to meticulously document their theatrics for posterity. They were the rock stars of the battlefield, all flash and impractical armor. You, as a guard, trained for something far more mundane, yet infinitely more critical. Endurance. For vigilance. For the subtle, unglamorous art of not being surprised by an axe to the face, while everyone else, including the valiant knights, was safely tucked away in their beds, presumably dreaming of dragons and damsels. Your training was fundamentally different. It was less about striking decisive blows and more about standing perfectly still for hours until your legs went numb and you began questioning your very existence. Then, somehow, standing some more. It was less about leading a glorious charge and more about preventing those charges from ever happening, which, let's be honest, is a significantly less exciting narrative for future generations. Nobody writes epic poems about the guy who successfully deterred a bandit raid by simply being there, radiating an aura of profound tedium that made the bandits reconsider their life choices. Yet, that was your glory, your quiet, unacknowledged, incredibly tedious glory, a triumph of static over spectacle. The knight yearned for a good fight. You yearned for a quiet night, an uneventful shift, and perhaps a slightly less lumpy mattress. You learned that the true victory wasn't won on the battlefield, but in the profound, unbroken silence that indicated no one was currently trying to breach your wall. And that, in itself, was a form of existential disappointment, because truly uneventful shifts meant truly boring shifts. Your daily regimen? Think medieval CrossFit, but with significantly less motivating music, considerably more dampness, and a substantially higher chance of contracting dysentery, tetanus, or a persistent fungal infection. We're talking long measured marches along the ramparts for hours on end, until every uneven stone in the walkway felt personally responsible for the throbbing ache in your arches. This wasn't a leisurely stroll. It was a rhythmic, almost hypnotic patrol, designed to instill a pace, a rhythm that could be maintained indefinitely through blistering sun, freezing rain, or the sudden, unpleasant onset of a localized hailstorm. You walked until your mind became a blank slate, until the sheer monotony of putting one foot in front of the other became a form of active meditation, punctuated only by the occasional distant sound that you immediately had to identify as either squirrel or imminent doom. You learned to move with a quiet, efficient gait, minimizing any sound or unnecessary effort, because wasted energy was wasted life, and life was precious, or at least slightly preferable to the alternative. Then came the standing. Oh, the standing. Standing motionless until you not only questioned your own existence, but also the fundamental nature of reality itself. Your watch commander, a man likely possessed of a bladder of iron and a heart of stone, would demand unwavering stillness. He'd pace behind you, occasionally poking you with a stick, just to ensure you weren't actually part of the masonry. Every muscle in your body would scream. Your bladder would stage a full-blown rebellion, demanding immediate negotiation, but you held firm. You learned to redistribute your weight with microscopic shifts, imperceptible to an outside observer. You learned to flex and unflex muscles subtly, to tense and release, all while appearing as inert as the very stone you guarded. This wasn't just about physical resilience. It was about conquering the mind's incessant demands for comfort, for movement, for anything to break the soul-crushing tedium. You achieved a level of stoicism that would make a Greek philosopher weep with admiration, primarily because the alternative involved a swift and very public reprimand, or worse, being assigned latrine duty for a month, a truly abhorrent fate given medieval hygiene standards. You learned to control your breath, your muscles, even the urge to scratch that persistent itch that felt like 100 tiny spiders dancing on your nose, all in service of unwavering observation. It was a living statue competition where the prize for losing was usually a rather messy death, or at the very least, a severe reduction in your already abysmal rations. And let me tell you, no soup for Cousin Gregory if he started fidgeting on watch. And the drills. Relentless, repetitive, mind-numbing drills with a spear, a crossbow, or whatever rudimentary weapon was deemed appropriate for your station. These weren't designed to build rippling biceps or impressive poses for a hypothetical medieval Instagram account. They were designed to build unflagging reliability, to ensure that under duress, under the gnawing ache of fatigue and fear, your movements would be automatic, precise, and utterly predictable. You learned to brace a spear against a charge with the strength of a rooted tree, absorbing the impact without flinching. You learned to load and fire a crossbow in a specific, efficient sequence that became pure muscle memory, so ingrained you could probably do it in your sleep, which you were often tempted to do. It was less about brute strength and more about proving you wouldn't spontaneously combust from sheer boredom or collapse from exposure. The goal was to make vigilance your default state, even when your eyelids weighed a ton and your feet felt like frozen stumps, even when your brain was screaming for the sweet release of unconsciousness. You were taught how to use your chosen weapon, not just for offense, but for defense, for warning, for signaling. A specific rap of a spear butt against the stone wall could communicate all clear to a distant comrade. A particular angle of a held crossbow might signal a silent warning to a fellow guard. You became an extension of the castle's passive defenses, a living, breathing component in its intricate layered security system. And you did it all with a quiet, grim determination, because complaining just meant more drills, and more drills meant less sleep, and less sleep meant more rats judging you. This wasn't just about looking, it was about seeing everything, hearing everything, and preferably, smelling very little. In a world devoid of artificial light and constant background noise, your natural senses were honed to an almost supernatural degree. You were trained to become a human sensor array, perpetually scanning, processing, and interpreting the subtle cues of your environment, a kind of biological sonar system. Your ears became finely tuned instruments of paranoia. You learned to distinguish the natural, soul-crushing sounds of a medieval night. The mournful howl of the wind whipping through an arrow slit that sounded like a tormented ghost. The distant, unsettling hoot of an owl that sounded suspiciously like a coded signal. The rhythmic, yet profoundly irritating chattering of your own teeth, from the truly threatening ones. Unfamiliar footsteps on the outer bailey. Not a good sign. Was that the shuffling gait of a peasant or the measured tread of a fully armored man attempting to be stealthy? You learned the difference, every minute variation in sound echoing a potential threat. The distinct, ominous sound of a siege ladder being quietly propped up against the wall, perhaps muffled by hastily thrown straw. Definitely not a good sign. A distant human scream that abruptly cuts off. Congratulations, you're now a highly specialized, very paranoid human listening device, the medieval equivalent of an acoustic early warning system, except with significantly more earwax and fewer digital displays. You could discern the cadence of a horse's hooves on different surfaces, the hollow thump on packed earth versus the sharp clatter on cobblestones. You could tell if a distant dog bark was a natural occurrence or a coded warning. You learned to identify the specific calls of night birds and to recognize when one was out of place, or perhaps a clever mimic. You could literally hear trouble brewing long before it became visible, your very life depending on the accuracy of your auditory interpretations. Your eyes, too, became instruments of precision. In near total darkness, you learned to leverage every sliver of ambient light, The faint glow of the moon filtering through a cloud, the distant twinkle of stars that offered little comfort, the last vestiges of twilight clinging to the horizon. You became a master of scotopic vision, training your eyes to detect movement in the deepest shadows, to discern the faint outline of a figure against a slightly less dark background. You learned the subtle ways shadows shifted, how even a faint mist could conceal a moving form, and how to spot the glint of metal that betrayed an enemy trying to remain unseen. You could differentiate between a cluster of bushes and a huddle of encroaching raiders, between a discarded log and a man crawling on his belly towards the gate. This hyper-awareness of your surroundings meant that even a single misplaced pebble or a slightly disturbed patch of grass could trigger an alert, a silent scream in your mind. And your nose, once merely an instrument for breathing, became a highly calibrated detection device, particularly useful in conditions of low visibility. You learned to distinguish the myriad, often overwhelmingly pungent, smells of a medieval castle and its surroundings. Is that the pervasive aroma of damp stone and unwashed humanity, or the distinct, alarming scent of something burning where it shouldn't be? The faint, coppery tang of fresh blood on the wind, the acrid smell of unwashed bodies moving quickly, perhaps carrying the unique scent of a distant, foreign land. You could identify the specific scent of rain approaching, or the subtle, sweet decay of a body, long before it became a problem for the sanitation crew. This wasn't just about observation. It's about ingesting your environment through every available orifice, building a complete, if frequently disgusting, picture of your surroundings. The psychological trauma of daily smells probably accumulated faster than the physical wear and tear on your feet, leading to a permanent, low-grade nausea. You became intimately familiar with every nook, cranny, and questionable damp patch of your castle. This wasn't just geographical knowledge, it was an absorption, a literal internalization of the castle's very essence, dampness and all. Blind spots, you knew them better than your own family, better than the back of your flea-bitten hand. Hidden passages, you'd probably slept in them during a particularly cold watch, or used them to sneak a quick forbidden smoke when you thought no one was looking. You learned the subtle flow of air through the corridors, how a draft from a certain window could carry the scent of brewing ale, or more importantly, the faint smell of burning something unpleasant outside the walls. You understood the peculiar acoustics of the courtyards that made every whispered secret echo strangely, and how a shouted warning in one tower could be heard in another thanks to clever architectural design. You were a walking, talking, quietly, of course, blueprint, a human map of the fortress. This intimate knowledge made you a living extension of the fortress itself, able to anticipate and react with the quiet, chilling efficiency of a highly optimized medieval security drone. You could navigate the castle in pitch darkness, feel the subtle vibrations of movement through the stone, and identify which section of wall was most likely to crumble next due to erosion, or more worryingly, a poorly placed siege engine. You knew where the rat populations congregated, which staircases creaked the most, and which sections of the battlements offered the best, if most exposed, vantage points. This profound understanding allowed you to spot anomalies immediately. A stone out of place, a cobweb broken where it shouldn't be, a shadow that felt wrong. These subtle cues screamed volumes to your trained mind. It meant you were invaluable for internal security as well. A missing tapestry, a mysteriously open chest, the distinct smell of forbidden cooking in a private chamber. Nothing escaped your intimate, silent knowledge of the castle's internal rhythms. This wasn't just training, it was an absorption, a literal internalization of the castle's very essence, dampness, secrets, and all. You were not just a guard. You were the castle's silent, sentient nervous system, perpetually on edge. And sometimes, its very pungent nose, which was definitely not in the job description. Beyond the grueling drills, the sensory overload, and the profound physical discomfort, training instilled a deep, almost pathological sense of loyalty and discretion. This was perhaps the most intellectually demanding aspect, requiring constant self-censorship and a keen understanding of social hierarchy, a treacherous maze of unwritten rules and unspoken threats. You heard things. Oh, you heard things. The Lord's questionable hygiene habits, leading to a daily aroma that could curdle iron. The ladies' illicit late-night meetings with a suspiciously well-dressed stable boy, their hushed whispers carrying just a little too clearly on the still night air. The cook's suspiciously potent special sauce that was definitely not just herbs and was probably responsible for half the castle's stomach ailments. You overheard hushed arguments between nobles, secret plans for political maneuvering that seemed to involve a shocking amount of betrayal, and the truly horrific details of the latest plague outbreak in the nearby village that the Lord was desperately trying to keep quiet to avoid panic, or more likely, to avoid losing his tax base. You saw things too: illicit gambling in the barracks, squires attempting to sneak out for a less than chaste evening, the occasional quiet disposal of what was definitely not just kitchen waste from the Lord's personal chambers. You witnessed moments of private despair, sudden bursts of rage, and the quiet machinations that kept the medieval world turning, usually with a lot of backstabbing, questionable alliances, and very little soap. And you learned very quickly and very thoroughly to keep your mouth shut about those things. This wasn't just good manners. This was a quiet, internalized code of conduct, emphasizing trustworthiness and reliability, enforced by the very real threat of a swift, unpleasant demise. Because let's be honest, loose lips sank castles, and getting caught gossiping about the Lord's bizarre obsession with collecting squirrel pelts, or worse, his wife's indiscretions, was a fast track to being thrown into the moat, or even more unpleasantly, being forced to clean the latrines indefinitely, a fate truly worse than death, given medieval hygiene standards and the sheer volume of excrement involved. Your discretion wasn't about moral fortitude, it was about self-preservation. You understood that the castle's secrets were as much a part of its defense as its thick stone walls. A guard who couldn't be trusted with private information was a liability, and liabilities in the medieval world had a remarkably short shelf life, often ending abruptly at the bottom of a well. Your silence was a testament to your professionalism, your cunning, or perhaps just your overwhelming desire to avoid public floggings and starvation. It was a discipline of character, mostly about not getting yourself killed, but also about understanding that your survival depended on your ability to be an invisible, unhearing, unseeing presence when it came to anything that wasn't an external threat. You were a vault for secrets, a walking, breathing non-disclosure agreement in an era that hadn't even invented parchment large enough for such a document. The medieval castle was a teeming hive of gossip and intrigue, a reality show of power and betrayal, and you, the quiet defender, were privy to it all, condemned to carry the weight of countless indiscretions without ever uttering a single word. You became a living database of uncomfortable truths, a silent repository of all the human failings that occurred behind thick stone walls. This profound training, this relentless forging of body and mind through a gauntlet of physical discomfort, sensory overload, and psychological pressure, transformed you into something more than just a man with a weapon. It made you a sentinel, a silent, unwavering extension of the castle's will. And as the night descended and you took your post, every fiber of your being, honed by countless hours of deliberate suffering and monotonous vigilance, was tuned to the subtle whispers of a world that constantly sought to breach your walls. You were ready for nothing to happen, mostly, but ready nonetheless. You've been forged in the crucible of medieval guard training, a process that has refined your senses, hardened your resolve, and perhaps permanently dimmed your enthusiasm for life. Now, it's time to live that reality, to fully embrace the daily grind, the monotonous, relentless cycle that truly defines the medieval castle guard. This isn't the stuff of heroic sagas. This is the quiet, unsung saga of enduring another night. Your shift, your lifeblood, stretches from the melancholic descent of dusk to the agonizingly slow crawl of dawn. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in a fleeting, mocking display of beauty, the castle transforms. The bustling, noisy daytime energy recedes, replaced by the deep, pervasive quiet that makes every rustle, every creak, a potential harbinger of doom. This is when your transformation from a warm-blooded human into a living, breathing security sensor is truly put to the test. You assume your post, a chosen spot on the battlements, near a gate, or perhaps in a drafty tower, and the waiting begins. It's an exercise in monumental patience, a challenge to your sanity as you count the individual breaths you take, the heartbeats that echo in your ears. Your eyes, now accustomed to the gloom, perpetually scan the surrounding landscape, a murky tableau of trees, fields, and distant flickering lights that might be a friendly campfire, or, more likely, a band of unpleasant individuals planning your demise. You listen, straining to differentiate the innocuous sounds of nature, a nocturnal bird's call, the whisper of the wind through the tall grass, from anything that smacks of human intent. Every shadow is a potential threat, every distant glint a possible blade. Your shift is a continuous, low-frequency hum of paranoid vigilance, broken only by the occasional challenge of a fellow guard, a ritualistic exchange of passwords designed more to confirm sentience than to actually deter any sophisticated infiltrator. "Who goes there?" you'd call out, your voice rough with the cold, hoping the answer was just another miserable soul like yourself, rather than someone who intended to introduce you to the sharp end of a very unpleasant weapon. This ritual was not merely for security, it was a desperate, subtle affirmation of continued life in the vast, indifferent darkness. And then there's the weather, your constant, insidious adversary, far more reliable and relentless than any human foe. It doesn't care about your noble duty, your aching bones, or your desperate need for a warm meal. It is an impartial, omnipresent tormentor. A summer night might bring a brief respite, a merciful coolness after a day of oppressive heat, but it also brings the buzzing, bloodthirsty hordes of mosquitoes, each bite a tiny, maddening distraction from your vital watch. And then there's the humidity, clinging to your skin, making every movement feel heavy, every breath thick. But summer nights are a luxury. More often the wind howls, a relentless, icy fist punching through your thin wool tunic, stripping away any illusion of warmth. It whips your hair, tears at your cloak, and carries the scent of distant rain, a promise of further misery. The rain itself, when it inevitably comes, is a cold, penetrating deluge that soaks you to the bone within minutes, turning your clothes into heavy, sodden shrouds that cling to your shivering frame. Every drop feels like a personal insult, a constant reminder of your profound discomfort. Your fingers go numb on your weapon, your feet slosh in your boots, and your teeth begin an uncontrollable, percussive symphony. You try to huddle deeper into your cloak, but it offers little protection, mostly just trapping the cold dampness against your skin. And then, the winter. Oh, the medieval winter, a season invented by the gods specifically to test the limits of human endurance. The snow falls, silent and relentless, painting the world in a deceptive blanket of white, but also muffling sounds and freezing exposed skin to the point of agonizing numbness. Your breath plumes in thick clouds. Your beard, if you have one, becomes a delicate frost-rimmed sculpture, and every muscle in your body screams with the effort of simply remaining upright. The wind whips snow into your eyes, blinding you, turning your world into a swirling vortex of white, while the icy air sears your lungs with every shallow breath. There's no escaping it, no modern heated breaks, no warm drinks, just the relentless, indifferent cold, chewing at your resolve, daring you to fall. The weather isn't just an inconvenience, it's a weapon, constantly grinding you down, testing your body, and attempting to pry open the cracks in your sanity. But perhaps the most insidious threat you face, far more potent than a raiding party or a blizzard, is the threat of the mundane, the soul-crushing boredom. Your mind, deprived of external stimulation, becomes a highly efficient engine of self-torment. You count the stars, you count the stones in the wall, you silently compose epic poems about the structural integrity of the gate hinges. You invent complex imaginary games involving pebbles and dust motes. Every single passing minute feels like an hour, every hour an eternity. Your thoughts drift from the warmth of the cook's kitchen and the dubious quality of his stew to the subtle shift in the wind's direction. You find yourself analyzing the trajectory of a falling leaf with the intensity of a scholar, or debating the philosophical implications of a particularly stubborn drip of water. This isn't quiet contemplation. This is the quiet erosion of your will, the constant vigilance, the relentless scanning of the horizon for a threat that almost never materializes, becomes a profound psychological burden. Your eyes blur from staring into the darkness. Your ears ache from straining for sounds that don't come. You fight the urge to slump, to close your eyes for just a moment, a battle waged internally that consumes more energy than any physical exertion. The sleep deprivation begins to play tricks on you. Shadows dance, whispers seem to emanate from empty air, and you occasionally hallucinate the faint, delicious smell of freshly baked bread, only to be snapped back to the reality of damp stone and pervasive human waste. This is the true test of the guard, the ability to remain utterly awake and focused when every fibre of your being is screaming for oblivion, all while battling the internal demons conjured by sheer, unadulterated tedium. It's a testament to human stubbornness that any guard made it through a full shift without falling asleep and tumbling off the battlement, or simply deciding to walk away from it all and become a very cold, very disgruntled hermit. And then there's the call to arms. The glorious, terrifying, and thankfully rare occasion when your vigilance actually pays off. The moment when that subtle shift in the distant shadows isn't just a trick of the light, when that faint, unusual sound isn't just a badger digging for grubs, but something truly menacing. It begins with an almost imperceptible change in the air, a prickle of dread on your skin, perhaps a distant, muffled bark of a dog that sounds wrong. Then a faint glint of moonlight on metal far out on the plain, or the unmistakable creak of a siege ladder being propped against the outer wall, a sound that sends a jolt of icy adrenaline through your system. Your heart, which moments ago was beating a slow, bored rhythm, now pounds like a war drum in your chest. This is it. The moment you've been simultaneously dreading and preparing for your entire career. Your training kicks in. You don't think, you react. A sharp shout, a specific warning call echoing across the battlements, designed to cut through the stillness of the night. A frantic pounding of your weapon against the alarm bell. A jarring, metallic clamour that slices through the castle's slumber, awakening everyone with a visceral jolt. The previously silent fortress erupts. Torches flare to life. Figures rush to their posts, the sounds of armour clanking, frantic shouts, the panicked whinnying of horses from the stable. You load your crossbow, your fingers surprisingly steady despite the tremor in your hands, or grip your spear, its familiar weight a sudden, comforting presence. Your role now shifts from passive observer to active participant, a frontline defense. You aim, you fire, you push, you stab, you yell. You are the first line, the thin grey line, the human speed bump, meant to slow the inevitable onslaught, to buy precious moments for the castle's more heavily armed but considerably less alert defenders to rouse themselves and join the fray. You become, for a terrifying, exhilarating few moments, the focal point of the castle's survival, your every action a desperate plea for more time. And then, as quickly as it began, it's over, or at least the initial rush subsides. The attack is repelled, or the alarm was false, a terrifying phantom. The adrenaline crashes, leaving you shaking, hyper-aware, and utterly drained, but also, paradoxically, strangely alive. And then, after what feels like an eternity, comes the relief of dawn. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the blackness of night begins to recede, giving way to a muted grey, then a faint rosy blush on the eastern horizon. The first birds begin their hesitant chirping, a tentative, hopeful melody that heralds the return of light. The mist, if there is any, lifts like a ghostly shroud, revealing the familiar, solid contours of the world around you. You see your fellow guards, their faces etched with the same weary exhaustion, their eyes red-rimmed and bloodshot, but alive. You exchange tired, knowing glances, a shared understanding of the long, silent battle you've just fought against the darkness, the cold, and your own minds. The castle gradually awakens around you, a slow, creaking return to life. Smoke begins to curl from chimneys, the faint sounds of breakfast preparation drift from the kitchens, and the first rays of sunlight, thin and cold, finally touch your face. This isn't the warmth of a fire, but the warmth of knowing that for now, for this one glorious day, you have survived. You have endured. You have held the line. Your shift is over. You finally get to hand over your post to the next miserable, sleep-deprived soul, offering a grim nod of shared suffering. You limp back to the guardhouse, every muscle aching, your mind a foggy mess of images and phantom sounds, craving nothing more than a few hours of sleep, even if it's on a hard, straw-filled pallet. You've done your duty, you've faced down the night, and for a medieval guard, that was a victory in itself, perhaps the only victory you could truly count on. You've endured the silent watch, battled the elements, and stared down the existential dread of medieval boredom. Now, let's get down to the brass tacks, or more accurately, the cold steel and rough leather of what actually kept you alive, or at least slightly less dead. We're talking about the gear, the bits and bobs that were less about heroic grandeur and more about pragmatic, often grim, survival.
Forget the gleaming jeweled swords of Hollywood's leading men. Your arsenal was built for function, not fanfare, designed to deter, to injure, and, if absolutely necessary, to buy you a few extra agonizing seconds before your inevitable demise. First up, the basic weaponry. For a castle guard, your primary implement of dissuasion was rarely a fancy longsword. Those were for knights, who had the luxury of falling off their horses in style. No, your bread and butter was far more common, and frankly, far more effective in confined spaces or against an unprepared opponent. The spear, for instance. Oh, the humble spear. It was cheap to produce, easy to teach, and devastatingly effective. Its reach was paramount, keeping an angry, heavily armed visitor at a respectful and crucially safe distance. In the narrow confines of a gatehouse or the tightly packed formations on a battlement, a spear was a brutal, efficient tool for poking, prodding, and preventing anyone from getting too close to the valuable squishy bits of a castle defender. It wasn't about elegant parries, it was about presenting a bristling wall of sharp points, a porcupine of medieval displeasure. You weren't a duelist, you were a human barrier, and the spear was your way of saying, "Stop right there," or risk an unfortunate impaling incident. Then there was the crossbow. This wasn't some quick-firing, rapid reload marvel. Early medieval crossbows were often heavy, cumbersome affairs, requiring a considerable effort to cock, sometimes even a foot stirrup and a belt hook, making them about as swift as a dying snail. But once loaded, they packed a punch. A bolt from a crossbow could penetrate armor that would laugh at a standard longbow arrow, delivering a brutal, concussive blow. Your training taught you to reload under pressure, a frantic dance of muscle and tension, knowing that every second was precious. A guard's crossbow shot wasn't about graceful archery. It was about delivering a single, decisive, devastating blow to the most vulnerable target you could acquire in the fleeting seconds before the enemy closed in. And, of course, the ever-present dagger. Not for grand combat, but for desperation. This was your last resort, your intimate close-quarters solution, used when an enemy had bypassed all other defenses and was now uncomfortably close. Perhaps